have to create a stimulus for your body, give it recovery in order to create some adaptation. If enhancing performance is the goal, right, it's not just about not having disease, it's actually like thriving, right, optimizing in certain ways. That takes energy, that takes work. That's not a passive process. And so you have to think about how do you like strategically pair stimulus with recovery to create an adaptation. And I think that's very evident for people like on a physical domain, right? Exercise is a great, very tangible example of that. But I would argue that the same principles hold true for emotional fitness, cognitive fitness, all these things that all of us need to work on.
Welcome to the Precision Medicine Made Simple podcast, where we simplify the complex world of precision medicine. We're here to explore how personalized healthcare can empower you to understand and improve your health to live a longer and healthier life. Join us as we break down the latest in medical science into actionable insights. Let's make precision medicine accessible and actionable for everyone. This episode is sponsored by Biography Health, where DNA-powered healthcare is designed just for you. Biography Health is a HIPAA-compliant precision medicine platform that equips providers with AI-driven recommendations powered by your genetics, health history, and clinical insights, all while keeping data private, secure, and independent from large EHR systems. If you're a provider ready to bring precision medicine into your practice, visit biographyhealth.com to learn more. Or if you're a patient who wants your doctor to explore this, point them our way. We'll help them bring personalized healthcare to life. As a reminder, this episode is for educational purposes only. This episode is in no way a replacement for professional health advice. Please consult with your professional primary care provider for medical advice. If at any point you feel that a topic discussed on our podcast was misrepresented, or if you have additional insights that could enhance our discussions, we wholeheartedly encourage you to reach out to us. Your feedback is invaluable in helping us improve and in ensuring our content remains both informative and reflective of the latest developments in precision medicine. Hey everyone, welcome to the Precision Medicine Made Simple podcast. I'm Taylor Kuhn. Unfortunately, I'm not joined with my co-host here, Dr. Stanford, but today I'm really excited for our guest. Our guest brings a rare combination of expertise to healthcare. With a background as a strength and conditioning specialist and competitive athlete, this physician understands human performance from both the training room and the exam room. As founder of VIM Medicine and board chair of Vital Connections, they've built sustainable healthcare solutions focused on prevention and community equity. Currently on faculty at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital conducting research in preventive medicine, their insights have appeared in the New York Times and New England Journal of Medicine. From earning both an MD and MBA at Stanford to co-authoring the Lifestyle Medicine Handbook, this is someone whose mission to advance human health through performance-focused, community-centered care stems directly from their athletic origins. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Rich Joseph.
Wow, what an intro.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't have said that better. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, it's an honor. I mean, especially considering that we had a previous guest that referred you over. And if we have a previous guest that referred you over, it was shout out to Dr. Len for putting this together. I mean, we don't take referrals lightly.
For sure.
So it's, we really appreciate you to hopping onto the show.
Yeah, it's cool to be here.
Yeah. And so how we always like to kick off the show is there's always some form of moment that sort of changes maybe the perspective from traditional medicine to maybe more of like a proactive approach. And so I was wondering what that moment looked like for you. Was it when you were helping train some other athletes? Was it in your own personal journey? What did that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was probably an accumulation of moments. I don't know if it was one specifically. I mean, I came from a family where, my great grandfather was a sort of a community GP, right, who like went to people's houses and sort of how we think about it, like a general practitioner back in the day, right, who knew everyone in the community knew him and sort of he was revered. And so, medicine held some, there's esteem in my family and particularly with my mom. And so I think that was probably subconsciously, something I heard about, thought about, knew was important to the family when I was growing up. And so sort of subconsciously internalized. And then, as you said, I was as an athlete for forever. I mean, I'm a big believer that if you have a body, you're an athlete, right? So I use that term pretty loosely, but I was a competitive athlete, soccer and tennis growing up, and got really into training and sort of how I prepared for athletics, start to really learn how to take care of my own body, right? I think that was my entry point really into thinking about health more broadly is for me, health is very personal, right? Like I am still always figuring out how do I improve my own health, right, across a bunch of different domains, not just physical, but cognitive, emotional, relational, et cetera. And always sort of just been interested in sort of self-development more broadly. And health seemed like a great platform to sort of think about that. I think throughout my educational journey was fortunate enough to have people who I gravitated towards or who sort of took to me, who gave me a different version or sort of a different perspective on health, even from a really young age before I went to med school, honestly. And so, when I was in college, I got to work with David Katz, who's done amazing work on nutrition. As a physician, I worked before I went to med school with George Blackburn, who was up here in Boston, who I was learning about sarcopenia and working with the folks at Tufts before that, like it's still something that most physicians don't even know or learn about, right? And John Rady, who was doing research on exercise and its effect on cognition, things like that. And so I think I just, was sort of fortunate enough to be exposed to people who were thinking very differently about medicine, even before I went through formal training. And so really before I even went to med school, had the vantage point perspective that I thought medicine should be a lot more proactive and preventive, and was confused as to why it wasn't, which made my training a lot harder because I had that perspective, I think, going in.
Right.
I'm glad I finished it. But thankfully also never sort of lost that perspective as I went through.
And then was there a specific moment that stemmed, or was the sort of like turning point to then creating, is it VIM medicine, VIM medicine?
Yeah, VIM,
And
and VIM stands for Vitality in Motion.
vitality and motion.
And so
Love it.
for me, like motion and movement has always been like that was sort of my gateway into health. And for other people, it's different things, right? They find health in different ways. So VIM is sort of like a personal philosophy. It's also the name of the practice. And movement is a sort of cornerstone of the practice too, obviously, as well. I work on with clients. But no, the practice, I sort of, as I said, I mentioned, went to med school with the sort of loose idea in the frustration that the world of strength and conditioning, training more specifically, was not at all part of medicine, right? Healthcare delivery was like, it wasn't part of that. And those were like two totally separate worlds. And in my mind, it made total sense that the two should be combined in a thoughtful way if we want to be more proactive with people and enhance their functional capacity. And so went to med school with that in mind. I went through zigs and zags, as all of us do in med school, get exposed to a bunch of different things, different fields, different specialties. But somehow sort of kept grasp on that like big vision, right? And didn't really get derailed. And so trained in internal medicine here in Boston. Mainly because internal medicine is super broad. You can do a lot of different things with it. You learn everything about the body, really, and I think you sort of are trained to think pretty holistically. But came out of residency, and had a practice that I kept over at the Brigham. I had, we'll talk about the nonprofit work that I got involved that started. But even during that, had started my practice as a total side hustle. One of my close friends has a high-end fitness facility downtown Boston, and it's like, here, like, just like come over. Like, we have a bunch of people who would be interested in what you're thinking, what you're doing. I had a bunch of friends, guys my age, your age, who hadn't looked under the hood like forever, and
Right.
were probably in their 40s or whatever, and still training like they're in their 20s, and needed an updated operating system for just how to think about how to approach their health and longevity. And so it started as a side hustle, total experiment, and now obviously it's grown since then.
I think one thing that I've appreciated about just hearing some of your perspective is, yeah, like there's the exercise and there's like, but two things that I heard on this podcast in particular was you mentioned there's like the recovery, but then there's also the mindset, which, as I'm talking to you now, I could really see the mindset of an athlete also plays a huge factor into the longevity as well. And so I was wondering if you can just
Totally.
dive into that approach a little bit more and how you're approaching that with your patients.
Yeah, as I said, I'm like the belief that if you have a body, you're an athlete.
Right.
I use, as I think about the philosophy of my practice and the way I practice, I call it performance medicine. And performance, it has an athletic connotation to it, right? For sure. I mean, I define performance much more broadly. It's like your capacity to bring attention and energy to what matters most to you in your life, right? And
Right.
and so I think anybody can sort of get behind that definition. People want to perform well, sort of no matter what phase of life, no matter what they're dealing with, diseases, et cetera, that they already have. Um, and so, the mindset is really like, progress over perfection, right? Like keep sort of like, it's a journey, right? And we have ups and downs and setbacks and failures and things like that. And a willingness to continue to experiment with yourself and figure out what works and get better. It's obviously, the work I do with clients is very behaviorally grounded too, right? I think it's like, to your point, it's very easy to give someone like the prescription of what they should do. That said, I still think, like, and as you said, I think we need to be much more tailored and specific with people around how we dose and sort of give the prescription of exercise to people. Like exercise is medicine, and unfortunately, most physicians had no idea how to actually prescribe it in a thoughtful, very personalized and highly specific way for the people that they're working with. And I don't know where I was just going with that, but I think those are like some of the things that I think about in the context of my practice. And again, like performance is a very broad term. Exercise, I think movement is a very tangible application of the idea of like you have to create a stimulus for your body, give it recovery in order to create some adaptation, right? Like
Right.
we want to, if enhancing performance is the goal, right? People don't. It's not just about not having disease. It's actually like thriving, right? Optimizing in certain ways, right? You have to. That takes energy. That takes work. That's not a passive process, and so you have to think about how do you like you sort of strategically pair stimulus with recovery to create an adaptation. And I think that's very evident for people like on a physical domain, right? Like, exercise is a great, very tangible example of that. But I would argue that the same principles hold true for, emotional fitness, cognitive fitness, all these things that all of us need to work on.
I do appreciate the reframe because as I'm starting to just learn more about the prevention space, I mean, yeah, I can understand the sentiment of like, oh, you want to be able to like delay death, live a longer and healthier life. But then there's still sort of like a pessimistic approach to it where it's like, and I guess even the word prevention, not that it's like buzzwordy, but it's almost like you're trying
Prevention
to
is not.
avoid instead of like performance where you're optimizing instead.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I find prevention is not salient. It's not sexy, right? Like, it hasn't worked for a lot of
Right.
reasons. I mean, I think that I find performance a lot more salient as a term and something that people can get behind because, I think all of us humans, we have a long. It's hard to sort of think super long term, right? It's hard to do that. I mean, I really try to push my clients to think strategically, sort of over the long road about their health, obviously. But most of us are still trying to manage the day to day and think about how am I showing up at work, how am I showing up for my kids, how am I showing up for the things that matter to me day to day. And I would sort of argue that the same foundational practices that you do to perform well day to day are also the same things that are going to set you up for good long term health, right? Over the long haul, right? And they're not in conflict, and so the earlier you can learn them and the more salient they are to day to day applications, I think the better, the more you'll hold on to them for the long road.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Now I do have, I wouldn't even say it's a controversial topic, but it's a topic that I feel like has been starting to trend in this direction. It's revolved around just like social media influencers
Yeah.
that are out there because I mean we've heard like peptides. We've also heard about like some of these other
Hmm.
supplements like NAD and
Hmm.
um these and then now there's like other supplements that some other insert influencer that's now promoting and has like a stake in, let's say, that supplement is like thinking that it's like great for people's health. Like how are you sort of managing some of those conversations then, especially when it pertains to like their health and fitness? I mean, that's very broad and dense question here, but I'm
Yeah.
curious about the approach and trying to sift through the noise of like everything that's out there because they think that's like something's for one influencer is going to work for them, it's going to work for me, but that's not always the case.
Well, that's a hard thing to do. You're getting at the real point of a personal application, right? Like I guess my approach and philosophy is I'm sort of open to a lot of different things. I mean, I was actually trained in a very like traditional academic internal medicine program, which I think was great and sort of like, science first and first principles around things and making sure things are safe for people. And obviously we want things to have an evidence base as much as possible. I mean, the challenge is that we're not going to have an evidence base for a lot, like so many of the things that are out there, right? There's like not incentives to do giant RCTs around, a bunch of peptides and hormones and things like that are, sort of all over social media these days. And so I think it's a tough and sort of challenging, sort of fraught and dangerous time for consumers, right? Because in one sense, we're in the area of consumer driven healthcare, where consumers like you and patients have agency, right? You can go out and get these things, get labs everywhere, and you don't even need a doctor for a lot of things these days. And on one hand, I think the agency is good. I think it's important because I think you sort of do need to be the captain of your own healthcare journey. Like I don't think primary care is going to be able to do that for our population going forward, at least the way it's like conceived of now or structured now. At the same time, right, it's sort of dangerous. It's hard to figure out what's what. It's hard to navigate. And I had the fortune within this context of a small, high touch practice to be able to go really deep with individuals and personalize different therapies to them. Right. And so I guess some foundational things in my mind is like, I still think you have to major in the majors of health,
Right.
right? It's, are you moving, right? How are you sleeping? What are you putting in your body in terms of, nutrition, sustenance? Are you connected to other people? Good emotional relationships. Do you have like a good sense of purpose, right? Like those are like big things that I think are foundational rocks for health. Um, but it depends on, then what are different pieces that we can use to sort of continue to enhance certain things that people are working on? Uh, and also what are, for some people, there are certain things that they will try. And I saw this when I was the chief medical officer of Restore. Right, Restore does like what I call interventional wellness, right? They do like, sauna, IV therapy, cryotherapy, these things that I wouldn't call them big rocks of health, but they're sort of on the margins. They can help, right? In certain people and with certain conditions and things like that. And I saw people who otherwise were really, had terrible symptoms, right? They were not well addressed or diagnosed in sort of the traditional medical paradigm.
Hmm.
And whether or not it was the actual therapy itself that helped them, who knows? But the act of actually coming in and sort of giving time, attention, and sort of investing in their health, served as a gateway for them to think, more broadly about their health, maybe feel better, and allow them to do other things, right, in pursuit of a better health. And so it all depends on the person, not just their physiology, but also their psychology, in terms of how we think about using different therapies. And I'm a big believer, like I don't practice under a certain banner, right? Like there's functional medicine, there's longevity medicine, there are all these different sort of fiefdoms and camps. Like my approach is like take the best of different approaches and what works best for the person that's right in front of you.
Mm.
And so as an example, like I have a client who is super in great shape, does a lot of the right things, right? Like majors in the majors, like puts a lot of time and energy into his health, right? And I know that for him, certain therapies, it's not like a crutch that he's using, right? It's something purposeful. And he actually unfortunately tore his Achilles. And speaking with his surgeon too, we both agreed that he should use BPC 157, which is a peptide to help enhance recovery, right? To see if it would help, right? To enhance his recovery after that surgery, because he's also doing all the PT, taking care of his nutrition, right? Do all the things, right? And so I think it's just a matter of who you're like. Yeah, you got to know people's physiology and their psychology, and you have to be safe. But I think it's also you have to let people conduct N-of-1 experiments with their health too.
Yeah. Okay. Now I have a personal question because,
There we go.
well, and I mean, this isn't medical advice, but of course, like,
Yeah.
but I'd love to get your take on this. So you mentioned that you had a client slash patient that tore their Achilles. I actually recently ruptured my patellar tendon playing basketball.
Yep.
And must I say, I was doing really well, and we were up by 17. I had 17, and then we lost, but that's besides the fact. But so I ruptured it in the third.
Clear cause and effect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
geez. But anyway, so I ruptured my patellar tendon, and I had surgery. It was about almost like 8 months ago. Okay, and I've been like going through rehab and trying to go through just like the traditional process. I looked into like I think NAD as well just to help, but then I've
Hmm.
also,
Hmm.
I mean, have heard about BCP 157, and I just don't know enough about it, and I've just seen like different. I mean, there was like this article from Eric Topol that talked about peptides and how it's like a little bit more
Hmm.
immature, but then I've also seen some others where it's like, seeing all the benefits there, and like me as a patient, I'm kind of overwhelmed because I don't really know if I should
Totally.
use it, but I do want to get back into playing as quick as possible. But there's a hesitancy within it.
Good. Well, I'm glad you have that hesitancy. It's important. I mean, I think to your point, you use the words benefit and risk. Like everything's a risk benefit calculation, right? In medicine, how we approach our own health. And I think that the example of peptide is a really interesting example, right? Because, again, like insulin's a peptide, GLP therapy, like the Ozempic, Wegovy, Zepbound, those are peptides,
Right.
right? And so we have a number of FDA-approved peptides that work really well and are quite safe from all that we know, right? There are just hundreds of them out there because they're small short chain amino acids. They're hundreds of them, right? And so we're never going to know what all of them do. We're never going to have randomized trials on all of them in humans, right? And so I think that it's a risk benefit calculus, right? To sort of take, and I think it's not just about the clinical efficacy; it's about the safety of these things, where they're being supplied from, right? And I think that's the challenge with peptides. Is that there's a whole like underground market for them now, right? Because they're not FDA regulated, right? So that whole factor comes into play, because they're not sort of like, pharmacologic, FDA approved medicines. And so I do think it's sort of a fraught time, but you see the people, and I've had, even clients of mine tell me like how much benefit they've derived from some of these, these peptides. And so I don't discard that, right? Like that's, N of one data is important, I think, just as important as sort of longer trials in some respect. And so I think it's a safety calculus that you have to take into consideration where it's being supplied from, right? And sort of your risk tolerance as an individual for trying certain things. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, even for me, like as someone who knows a ton about this, it's still like every patient is different in terms of what the calculus is, every client. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also just like the physical injecting myself too that I just haven't, because with BCP one,
Totally.
yeah, that's just it mentally
Yeah.
kind of gets to me. But like but I also like to think of myself
Yeah.
as a risky
I
person
get it.
too. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get. I mean, I don't personally like. I haven't used any peptides. I've never. I mean, I really don't even take that many supplements. Like, I'm pretty, So I'm pretty minimalist in how I approach my own health. Again, because I think like majoring the majors, while it might sound simple, is anything less. It's not easy in the world that we live in, obviously. And so most of my time and energy and attention, which I would argue is true, should be true for most people, should go into those things.
Yeah. I have a question when it comes. So, I was looking on your website, you were talking about how like you integrate wearables and biomarkers and all this. And like there's all these supplements that are out there too that people like think they should take. And in a way, it's almost like because they saw somebody take this, they're like, okay, I think I'm going to take this. But well, actually, these are two completely different questions. Because like one,
Yeah, what you got?
yeah, well, one is like, okay, like I look at my biomarkers just to get like a nice foundational sense of where I'm at. Like, what are you like
Mhm.
looking for, or what should people be looking for in the forefront? I mean, we've all heard like VO2 max is now, I feel like a very big thing, but is there anything else
Mhm.
that patients should be looking out for and sort of like testing themselves and trying to get like to a certain baseline?
This is a super important question, right? Because I do think that, like, number one, there's like so much data out there now, so people are overwhelmed, which I get completely, right? You can like go to these places and get like, 100 plus, lab tests and things like that, and not know like what should I actually pay attention to, what's like clinically meaningful, what's not, right? Is something in the red? Does it really it doesn't matter that much, right? And so I think it's a tough time to navigate a lot of that stuff. And and so I've tried like within the context, I'll say like within the context of my practice, a lot of the folks that I work with, I imagine some of the folks who listen to this podcast are, right, they're people who have real disease, right? It's like real sort of medically diagnosed disease. As a trained internist, like that was my training was to diagnose disease. And then you have like dysfunction sort of upstream of that, right? I think that's where a lot of the world of functional medicine plays, right? You have, metabolic dysfunction, in particular. I mean, I deal with a lot of musculoskeletal dysfunction for people, right? Who just like have been athletes for a long time or just sort of like play hard at life and things creep up. And then I would say like upstream of that, we have what's called like what I call drift, right? Really like, and that's what I think a lot of people care about and should care about is like just subtle drift over time, right? Because it's kind of imperceptible, and before you know, those things that becomes dysfunction, right? And I deal with a lot of folks in their sort of 30s, 40s, 50s who are sort of in that peak time of life when life is busy, work is busy, family's busy, things are crazy, and like sort of health gets put to the back burner. And even if they go to their primary care doctor, it's sort of like a good, check, everything's like sort of okay.
Right.
But they're not looking at pattern over time. They're not looking at that sort of subtle drift that happens over time, right? And I think that's like what's most important for people to pay attention to. And so as I think about like what are like the vital signs, right, for people as they think about their health and sort of middle age and trying to stay on top of it and be proactive, I think it sort of falls into a few different categories for me. So like one is like functional capacity, which is where I think VO2 max is sort of like risen to the pinnacle, or it's out there in the lexicon now. I mean, I think the reason VO2 max is so popular is because we have so much normative data around it, is showing how important it is as a predictor of longevity for folks, and just functional capacity. But I would also argue like relative muscular strength is another big one, right? Like, so how strong are you relative to your body weight, especially with, major compound lifts and important, basic human movements, squatting, hinging, things like that. Um, and then I think there's important things to look at, call them like risk, like medical risk, things that you look under the hood risk,
Mhm.
right? Is sort of
Right.
how we can think about it, right? And so, from my perspective, a few different things in terms of like metabolic health, like looking at fasting insulin is a big one, right? And so, you know, how because your insulin is going to get high way before your blood sugar gets high, way before people develop prediabetes and diabetes, right? Like we can get way more further upstream with metabolic dysfunction for people, right? You can catch that way earlier, right? If you pay attention to these things. Um, Same thing with visceral fat and sort of seeing like how much, are people storing excess fat around their organs, right? Or, that's a big one because that plus like CRP and looking at just like general levels of inflammation in the body, right? Because, inflammation is one of those things that makes everything worse. It's sort of like gasoline to the fire for cardiovascular disease and neurodegenerative disease and cancer risk and things like that. Um, and then ApoB, right, for like lipid profile, right? ApoB being the most important one, looking at atherogenic lipoproteins and sort of seeing over time, a lot of that is a big genetic component to that, but a lot of it also is lifestyle driven as well, and sort of like interrelates closely with metabolic health for folks. And the higher that is, the more risk that someone's going to develop plaque. Right? It's sort of that simple, in concurrence with inflammation and things like that. And then I think there are markers that are more like day to day that people should focus on, right? Like so we call them like lifestyle markers or day to day process measures, right? So for me, um, yeah, sleep duration and sleep efficiency are big ones, right? I think especially as people hit for 30 to 40, like your body's just less resilient. It needs more time to repair. You have to be much more intentional and thoughtful about recovery, right? If you want to perform optimally. And so how are people sleeping and are they sleeping efficiently? Heart rate variability and looking at like what's your heart rate variability trend, like what's your sort of average and what knocks you off that average, what helps you get higher than that average, right? And sort of how are you, looking at that sort of on a regular basis to sort of understand your levels of recovery and stress. And then I would also say, like, even, yeah, so beyond the day to day, I think there's also another big one for me, is just like general purpose and meaning for people in their
Hmm.
lives. And, um, call it like, the Japanese have the term ikigai, just for like what gets us out of bed every morning, right? People feel like, interested, connected to life, motivated, purposeful, right? Like I think, it's a huge, impact on people's health. So, I think there are just different types of call them biomarkers if you want to that sort of span different um, realms that I think are important to look at.
Yeah. Well, actually, I appreciate the sentiment because, well, I mean, especially with what you just said with biomarkers, it sounds there's like a tangible side of biomarkers where you can actually measure, but then there's the other side
Mhm.
where you talked about like ikigai, where you're trying to find a
Yeah,
meaning
more
and
subjective.
purpose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I tell my clients that like their sense of meaning and purpose is just as important as their VO2 max to me
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and then I mean
equally.
that leads into more of the argument and conversation to like health span and arguing like why you should be optimizing performance health and not just delaying death or living a longer life, but actually like enjoying the rest of your life for a long period.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, I think so much of health care and so much of our healthcare system is sort of if you dig deep enough, a lot of it's just predicated on a fear of death. I mean, that's like how a lot of the system functions, right? It's sort of like if you like dig deep into sort of like the psychology of how the system functions, a lot of it's sort of capitalizing on like just our inherent fear of death. And so I do think, in the conversation that we have around longevity, like, do I think it's possible to like increase the human lifespan if we do certain things well and have different therapies that come online? Yes, I do. I think that is possible. How much, I don't know, but I still don't think it gets around the fact that we should always be taught like death is something we should all talk about, think about, contemplate. I
Hmm.
think it's important to like live a contemplative life, and and think sort of back again. This is like where sort of major spiritual traditions and philosophies still come into play. And I think they're still like super relevant in the world that we live in. Like Stoicism, Buddhism, things like that. I mean, these are, ancient philosophies that have contemplated sort of human living and what it means to live well for so long. And so at the same time, I think we're, pursue a longer lifespan, right? You know, Health span obviously is just as, if not more important. I still think that sort of like these contemplative practices are so essential.
Yeah. Yeah. That brings me to the next question then. I mean, of course, we can't really predict the future, but a recurring theme that has been from previous guests is just talking about like the insurance based model, current
Hmm.
healthcare system, how it's just like very reactive. Do you have any thoughts on just like where it's going to be? I mean, some have been as outlandish as saying, well, I don't think it's that outlandish, but like the very controversial topic of saying like insurance isn't necessarily going to be as useful as it was beforehand. But I mean, did that also influence, let's say, starting VIM Medicine too, and just kind of like moving away from that? Like,
Yeah, I mean, well, candidly, like sort of based off of what I do now in my practice, I think it makes like there's no way I could operate in the sort of traditional insurance model for what I do. Just like it would not have worked. In some sense, it's like frustrating because I care a lot about access and sort of giving more people access to sort of this type of care. At the same time, I had to do something sort of like very values aligned and fulfilling for me. So how do I want to practice day to day?
right,
And I think that the way I think about insurance is that most healthcare insurance is sort of like a coupon or like a discount card in in sort of the healthcare system, right? People still have copays and things that they're paying out of pocket, obviously, and so it's sort of like a discount card. Like insurance in healthcare, I think it should function a bit more like auto insurance, right? Where it's like it's for catastrophic things. It's for like you total your car, like,
right.
and things happen to people, right? And they get hit with major diagnoses, they get in accidents, things like that. And so I think insurance is like really important. And as someone who trained in some of the most amazing hospitals in the world and can see what they can do for people who have real things like real disease and things that happen to them, right? It's pretty amazing what modern healthcare can do. So by no means am I like, discarding any of that or saying that's not important. But I think that like, as you think about your car, right, you take it in and you pay out of pocket usually to get oil changes and to, sort of for basic maintenance and things like that. And I think that more and more people now, younger generation, I mean, look at how much money is sort of going into the health and wellness sector now, right? So more and more people, I think, are getting used to paying for health. Uh, they don't necessarily like they're still getting used to paying for health care, right? But more and more sort of like wellness and healthcare are sort of blending now in the world that
Mm,
we live in, which I think is a good thing overall. So I think that a lot of the change is going to come more from sort of like consumer advocacy and sort of where people are putting their money and advocating for these things with their dollars, honestly. And I think we're seeing a shift now of younger folks just getting more used to and willing to pay out of pocket for uh, healthcare because they care about being more proactive in their health. It's more of a value for them.
yeah.
And I don't know why that is exactly with sort of like the younger generations, but I think maybe it's because we have much more science and it's out there much more in popular media and things like that, that people can do more at a younger age about their health.
Yeah, I definitely think I mean, we're in the age of information. I think, and sometimes I hear some, not necessarily my parents, but just people of the older generation, where they were talking about how it almost seems like their health is inevitable. Like maybe their parents have died from specific, factors, and then they're like, oh, okay, well, I mean, like for example, like my family, my dad's side of the family, a lot of them didn't make it past 65, and they're like, oh, okay, well, 65 is going to be our max, and then they kind of just accepted and try and enjoy the life up to 65.
Right, right, right.
You know,
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think that has been a lot of the mentality. And I think about, you know, my parents, I think about my grandparents and I think we understand aging a lot more now, too. I think, some of the fundamental drivers of aging we still don't necessarily understand, but I think we generally understand that some of the sort of fundamental cellular processes that are probably going on, sort of this drift or called entropy or whatever you want to call it, that's in the system over time. It's sort of like, steady sort of, we're all sort of on that steady decline. But I think we've seen, I mean, exercise is a great example, right? Of like, again, applying a stimulus with proper recovery for an adaptation, right? And so I see it all the time in the context of my practice because I do a whole functional fitness assessment for clients. But age is negotiable, at least from a functional physical like capacity, big time, right? Like I have 60-year-olds who could do more than 40-year-olds, right, and who
wow.
look healthier, right? And so I think that, yeah, I think all of us sort of like inherently understand now that like we can sort of like bend that curve, to slow it down.
Yeah. Oh man, what is the functional health assessment look like? Is it like number of push-ups, number of sit-ups, number of
It's a variety of different tests. I look across sort of all domains. So we look at balance, mobility, muscular stability, endurance, muscular strength, anaerobic capacity, and aerobic capacity. So try to sort of like hit all the important domains of fitness and sort of have different battery of tests across those and sort of tailor them to each person depending on what their fitness level is. And then in the context of their practice, I have like what's called the fitness, like a combine, right? So every year clients go through every year clients go
nice.
through the combine, right? We have like 4 different tiers and sort of see where people stack up. I think, people like objective metrics, right? This is why people sort of, they sign up for marathons, they sign up for things. It's like an objective thing to do. Whereas like, I'm trying to get people to train smartly across a bunch of different domains. So giving them objective metrics across all those different domains and making it hard. It's hard, I think, to be really good across all of them. And so that's the idea. That's what I'm trying to get my clients to train for.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah, I was assuming just like, yeah, they first go in and they're like, all right, let's see your max bench PR and see what you want. One rep max.
No, I don't usually throw people under that. No one rep max in my practice. Yeah, for sure. Got to be safe.
Well, so I mean, it's something that I've been looking into as well, is like whole genome sequencing, like let's say like microarray, where they're able to just also, see how their body reacts to a specific type of nutrition, a specific type of fitness based on their genetics and what like works well for them. Are you also doing that too for your practice as well?
I don't think the science is really there yet for a lot of that. I mean, I think I call that more like cool consumer insights now rather than sort of clinically actionable data. I mean, I think that, maybe we'll get there to see some of that stuff if that's true, and we can sort of really personalize plans based off of that. My sense is that it's going to be really hard to do that given the amount of sort of modification, epigenetic changes that happen to people over their life. Like, I don't know. Like, I just don't think the science is there with sort of like, looking at these individual SNPs, right, or single nucleotide polymorphisms to make, real recommendations for people around, their diet or their exercise. And I think it sort of distracts from a lot of the sort of, again, sort of the major and the majors for people. Like, where, I think, even if you look at the different camps of nutrition, whether it's paleo or, pescatarian or, Mediterranean or whatever, like, we focus so much on how they're different, right? Like 90% of them overlap. There's like 90% overlap between like most of the, like minus the American diet, right? But like a lot of them, there's a ton of overlap. And I think we sort of, it's much easier, I think, to get airtime by talking about the differences and sort of like the wars between factions. And so I use clinical like germline genetic testing as part of my assessment in the practice. So germline meaning like you get genes from mom and from dad, one copy of each, and we have certain genes that we know of, like BRCA is a good example, APC, right, that have like clearly elevate risk around certain conditions, particularly cardiovascular conditions, cancer, predisposition to certain cancers, things like that. And so I think that for me is much more clinically actionable, because then I can think like, how would I actually change or personalize someone's screening recommendations based off of that knowledge. And so, yeah, that's how I use genetics right now.
Yeah, I will say it is an interesting observation that I've seen, especially from just like a patient perspective. So we actually interviewed Dr. Leroy Hood, and he was talking about like PRS scores. And, when we're talking about PRS scores, monogenic variants, let's talk about like nutrition and fitness as well. It's like there's data, but like waiting to, some are considered research grade, some are considered clinical grade, but there's the argument that there isn't enough research done to be able to say that there isn't enough evidence back to be able to back some of the research that's out there. And
yeah, I mean, that's my understanding. So I haven't really like leveraged those too much in the context of my practice, but I try to keep following the data, see what's out there, right, and sort of make judgment calls over time of things that I feel like, hey, this is like something that I feel like is clinically actionable, relevant data that's meaningful and important, that should be part of like what I do for the clients I work with.
Yeah. Also, let me know if you don't want to have this part of the conversation too, like in the podcast. I mean, I think it's fun.
I'm an open book, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
And when there are things that, I think humility is super important, right? In medicine, I think that like, there's so much out there. Like I don't know everything for sure, right? Like I think the fun of what I do is now I get to just keep learning, right? And there's new stuff coming out all the time, and I have clients who bring stuff to me. I'm like, I never heard of that, but let me look into it. That's cool, right? And so I think it's much more about like, it's not paternalistic. It's partnership now, and I think that's what the model has to be.
Okay, whew. Okay, I appreciate it. Well, I appreciate the transparency and authenticity behind it too, because I mean, not to say that I've had conversations with some folks where there's like a little sensitive, where it's like, oh, I don't want to be like seen as like this that doesn't necessarily know it, but I appreciate just like the approach of just saying like, okay, like we're going to be learning about this X, Y, and Z. And
man, there's so much that I don't know. My goodness, right? Like every day, it's like you're just humbled, right? Yeah, it's humbling, but it's also cool, right? Because like for me, it's the fun is to keep learning, and I think that sort of grew up on a model of physician being sort of like the arbiter and sort of like the of knowledge, right? Sort of like the gatekeeper of a bunch of knowledge, medical knowledge. And I think that's like totally. I mean, the internet now with AI and stuff like this, like that's not going to be a thing anymore. So I think it's much more about like how can you relate to people? Do you have enough EQ, right? To sort of, can you understand people's psychology and know ways to push them in thoughtful ways and to sort of like support them in thoughtful
Mhm.
ways? And can you be like a real partner to them, right? And help them think through difficult decisions that don't, rarely have like clear black and white answers. And so, yeah, I mean, that's like what I think about. That's what my job is.
So, kind of backtracking just a little bit, just a statement that you said when there's like access to equity. And when I was looking into just, I mean, I haven't seen a revenue based model where they share it also with, yeah, to a nonprofit. I was reading about that. Would love to, that one, that's like very unique. And then also would love to know how that access to other folks with that nonprofit looks like. And couldn't you see other practices doing this as well?
Yeah, well, let me tell you. I'll tell you about the nonprofit. I'll tell you just like where things are now and how the nonprofits. I'll sort of paint the picture a little bit because it's evolving, right?
Right.
So, what happened with me? The backstory is that when I was here training at the Brigham in Boston, and for those who've been to Boston, right? So it's a super small city, in terms of just like geographic area, and it's pretty stark. I mean, like most cities have disparities in areas where certain folks who have less socioeconomic means live next to people who have more means. But I think in Boston it's like pretty stark because of the amount of like, wealth in the city, the medical infrastructure in the city, history of a lot of systemic racism in the city,
Hmm.
and real like redlining. And so you have certain neighborhoods in Boston, Dorchester, Roxbury, others that, it's maybe a mile and a half down the road from Back Bay. And there's about over, 25-year gap in life expectancy, right? That's like crazy.
Wow.
That's a crazy stat. Like, and it hasn't changed, which is
Wow.
just bananas. And you think about, and again, this is amidst the backdrop of like, some of the most prestigious academic hospitals in the world, right? In Harvard. And so I was just sort of like interested in that and like understanding why that was so. I also like did not particularly love being in the hospital when I was a resident, given which is not surprising to you probably now knowing what I do. I never wanted to be a hospitalist or sort of work in the hospital. And so I spent a lot of time in the community, just like hanging out, like when I had time, spending time like in Dorchester, Roxbury, just like, getting very separate from the hospital world and just meeting a bunch of folks there, nonprofits, community leaders, activists, et cetera, without any agenda, truthfully, just sort of more, it was me just like wanting to get out of, I guess, my current environment in the hospital and just like hang out and sort of explore and get to know the setting that I was in. And I think what I learned during that experience is that there are tremendous resources in the city of Boston. There are amazing nonprofits, amazing assets in all of these different communities. And often what I would see is that a lot of them just like weren't connected in ways that made sense to me, like to make things a bit more efficient in terms of how they work together. There was, a lot of nonprofits doing a lot of the same work, competing for the same dollars, et cetera. And so, through that, work sort of started a few different collaborative projects with a bunch of different nonprofits and folks I knew in the community, and that work actually really accelerated during COVID when I think it became very clear to people like, hey, we actually all need to work together,
Mm.
right? Because like
Right.
this needs to be like very shared collaborative effort, and so I ended up spinning that work off as a separate nonprofit called Vital Connections. And so Vital Connections, what we do, there's no direct service. It's all about helping to create a more equitable and efficient community health infrastructure in
Oh,
the city of Boston. And so
yeah.
making, solutions to big entrenched sort of equity issues should be driven by, started in, and owned by community, right? So the solutions should happen in community, but then we should take those solutions and bring them to the Mass General Brighams of the world, the city, et cetera, to make sure that they, continue to sustain and fund them, right? And so again, it's connecting work. That's really what it's called, Vital Connections, right? Strategic connection. Um, and so the org has grown. It was just me and my co-founder. So there's like 1.5 FTE when we started. Now it's like 9 people.
Nice.
$1.5 million org, like doing awesome work here in the city of Boston. So I'm the chair of the board, and it's like super exciting to be involved in that work day to day. I wouldn't feel as fulfilled in my own private practice if I didn't have that that I was doing as well. And what's happened now is that a number of my clients, sort of in my private practice, know about the nonprofit and have supported it, which has been awesome. And I would love to over time. I think the goal is certainly to continue to build the link between the two. I'm a big believer that part of my uh, why I don't love like a lot of what's happening in the long. It's not that I have some issues with like the longevity world right now because I
Ooh.
think it's just very ego. It feels like very egocentric to me.
Mm.
Like I guess is the point, right? Like very sort of it's about me and my health and living longer, et cetera. And I'm a big believer that like health is so that you can help other people, right? And help the world around you. Right? That's sort of why you want your health. And so it's an ethos that I try to build into my practice, and it's something that like I don't want to force people to have to support the nonprofit, but a lot of my clients have really loved learning about it and have gotten involved. And so for me, it's been a very like fulfilling model because I know that what I do is in my private practice is not something that people can access. A lot of people can access. And again, it's the way that I want to practice, so that's how I do it. But it's connected to like a much larger idea and philosophy around sort of giving and supporting community health. Yeah, so I hope that
Yeah, yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I appreciate you sharing the goal. And actually, that was going to be like the question that I have is, I mean, as an athlete, well, since you are an athlete, I mean, there are goals.
You're an athlete too, man. You have a body.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I was just fishing for
Yeah.
compliments
Don't
there.
for, don't forget it, man.
Well, so like there's goals. I mean, you always have goals that you're going to be like going after, whether that's for vital connections, VIM medicine. Was wondering like where do you see taking vital connections and VIM medicine next? Like, is there like a certain milestone that you're really trying to achieve? I guess. Well, I mean, you already kind of shared with vital
Yeah.
connections.
No, I mean, I think it's a good question, right? I think it's interesting, right? Like I do set goals and have vision, but I also think you have to let things evolve and sort of like be okay with serendipity and sort of like letting. And I think one of the big things for me in my professional life is like I cannot do everything, nor am I good at everything, nor do I like to do everything. And so for me, it's about like, how do I find and surround myself with some of the other best people and give them a ton of ownership over a vision and let them run with it. Right. Like, and I think like again, that's what an amazing co-founder when I started Vital Connections. There's no way the org would be where it is without her, and her, efforts throughout the years. And now we have also an amazing executive director now who really, is in charge of a lot of the vision going forward. I mean, she and I are super tight and talk a ton. So I think there's shared vision there. But I think we still have a lot to prove here in Boston, right? We're working way upstream of like health outcomes in the work that we do. But I think, the fundamental belief and premise is that like with better connections in the community health ecosystem, that does lead to improved health equity and outcomes. Like I do believe that. And how do we measure that, right? How do we show that over time? And so I think we're getting there, right? But that's going to take some time to actually show and prove. And can the model then be applied in other places, right? I don't know. I think that's like an open question, but something we think about a lot because the dynamic here in Boston is not just in Boston, right? It's in a bunch of other cities and urban areas of like throughout the country. Uh, with my practice, it's expanding, it's growing, which is exciting. It's not just me anymore, which is fun.
Nice.
I have a great co-founder in the practice who is sort of on the ex- you know operations side of things, and I'm more of like the clinical visionary, I guess, type. And I know that like despite the fact that I went to business school, like I actually don't love a lot of business operations and like thinking about that stuff. And so like I'm very clear, like I need support in that. I need help. I need someone who's gonna like really partner with me on that. And so that's awesome to see that come together. And the hope is to bring on a female counterpart to me sort of in the near future. And then the vision over the next 3 to 5 years is like, can we really like build a pinnacle practice around this delivery system of what we call health management medicine, right? This idea that changing how people think about their health, understanding that helping them understand that health is an asset, something that you have to strategically manage and invest right over the long term. And I view it as more of like an evolved version of primary care. It's not saying that primary care is dysfunctional. It's not saying that primary care is bad. It's just saying like that primary care needs to evolve, for more complex lives, and new information that we have now on how to keep people healthy and well. Um, and so can we get, probably 8 to 10 other clinicians, into the practice over time and maybe have it in, 3 or 4 geographies where we do it. It's like, it's really meant to be like an amazing experience for people. Right. I want it to get to the point where people don't want to move because of their health, because
Mm.
of the practice, because of their healthcare, right? Like that to me would be like, wow, that's pretty cool that people want to just, they refuse to move or change their location because their healthcare is so amazing.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to go back to because I feel like it was not that it was like slightly controversial, but it can be controversial. Where you were talking about just like the longevity space, then, and there's like a lot of people that's sort of like egocentric. Then, a I mean, for me, I'm even seeing that, and now there's like still a lot of question then as to like, should I be listening to this person? And I mean, now it just goes back to the whole like original conversation of just like influencers in general. How do we as patients like should we be like trying to sift through the noise then here to see what is best for us instead of getting caught into like this whole like snake oil salesman sort of scenario. Actually, what's funny though is like Dr. Lin talked about this too in our podcast.
What'd you say?
Um,
What was her take?
well, I mean, it's just like needing more providers
Yeah.
just like you, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just sure like other people within their network to be able to drive some of these conversations out there to make people aware that there could be other incentives like that are tied
Yeah.
to some of their business.
Well, I mean, just to be clear, like I have a lot of friends who are sort of in the call the longevity space or world, and I think a lot of the way I practice uses a lot of that. So I don't, by no means am I saying this. I think it's more like the general like a zeitgeist around longevity
Mm,
feels egocentric to me, right?
mm,
It's more like, what's in it for me? How am I living longer? How am I doing better? How, it's like I, and so I think that like, again, I still view health as like a very communal thing. I view it as your health serves other people, right?
right, right.
And so I think we're missing that in the conversation a little bit. But they're amazing people sort of doing work in longevity medicine now. And I think that like ultimately that's where a lot of things need to go. Right. And so like by no means it's like it's bad. Uh
Yeah.
but I think that the challenge is like anytime you have something new or like a new, again, I think like I would argue that a lot of the stuff in the longevity field right now is still, it's actually not even new necessarily. Like a lot of it is stuff that we've known or that's being repurposed or thought about more specifically in more intentional ways. And again, I think there are new things, new supplements, new drugs that are being tested and things like that, looking from more of like a aging perspective rather than like clear like clinical disease indication, which I think is really cool. And so like I'm excited to see what happens with some of that. Um, but I think anytime you see like you have new hype around something, right? You have the opportunity to commercialize it, and then sort of like for commercial incentives to get in the way of good clinical medicine, right? And that was like again that was like my main intention at Restore when I was there. Right, you have a large franchise system that needs to make money, and franchise owners who have capitalist incentives behind what they're doing, and like that often conflicts with sort of like really good clinical medicine, right? And so doing things in a pretty personalized way because it's hard to scale that, right? And so, um, I think that's the challenge, right? I think everyone still needs to like really think about and understand themselves as individuals making these decisions, understand their own risk calculus, right? Sort of go through the same questions that a health manager would, like a wealth manager would ask you, right?
Mm.
What's your time horizon? What's your risk analysis? What's your asset liability balance? What does your balance sheet look like? And here's your health now, right? Like all these things, I think, so they can get a bit more personalized view and then therefore be able to make more calculated strategic decisions about what they do for their health. Um, because nothing out there is inherently bad or good. I think it's just like the application that matters.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of Restore, I saw there was actually a short about your recovery
Oh,
routine, where it was like you went to.
was this was this on Instagram or something
Yeah, I think it was
or
on
on
YouTube. Well,
some social media?
yeah, it was like
Okay.
you go through cryotherapy, then you go to infrared sauna, and then you go to IV therapy. Was wondering just to know the science behind it, and also if you still do it and still agree with just that same, I guess the same recovery routine. Like, should everybody be doing something like this?
No, no. Well, so that's funny. I'm not on social media. I have no. I have LinkedIn, but I don't have any social media. So
Okay.
I remember when Restore had me do some of that stuff. And I think, so just talking about my experience there, because I think it's an awesome company in a lot of ways. And I still like have a lot of admiration for the founders of the company and what they've done. I think that they took a lot of things that were already out there that we knew, like if it have an impact on people's health, right? And a lot of like hormesis, right? Hormetic stressors like cold therapy, heat therapy, things like that, and sort of like commercialize them in a thoughtful way. I think they put recovery on the map more for people as something they really need to think about and pay attention to if they're thinking about, evolving their health over time and optimizing it in thoughtful ways. Because I think a lot of people know sort of like, yeah, exercise more, like do more, right? And I think that like their whole emphasis was like, but you also have to recover in order to do more, to live the life that you want to live, right? And sort of how do you do that strategically? And I think it's an important question that all people should ask, especially in like their frenetic, 24/7 world that we live in. Um, but I think that like a lot of it, again, like I'm a major in the majors kind of guy,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'd rather sleep than go get cryotherapy or red light therapy. Like it's just like a better, it's cheaper, it's free, it's like way more accessible, it's easy, and I think it has a bigger return, right? And so like, do I think cold therapy and heat therapy have a place? Like for sure. Do I think that IV supplementation has a place? Maybe, but I think if people generally are eating a really well balanced diet or dial in their nutrition, they probably don't need as much of that, right? But again, I think a lot of what I saw is that for certain people, like it was their entry point, it was their access point to think more intentionally about their health, right? Maybe exercise wasn't their thing. Maybe like, they tried certain things around nutrition, it didn't work for
Mm.
them. But somehow, or for whatever reason, whether it was, sauna, cryotherapy, hyperbaric therapy, IV therapy, like that was their like gateway to thinking more about their health and paying more attention to it and feeling better. And so I think that like that's amazing, right? Like, and I think for each person it's different, sort of how they think about how they access thinking more about their health more intentionally. Each of us had different gateways. For me, it was obviously, exercise and training was a huge piece for me. Um, but now like I've evolved my perspective, right, and want to think like how do I do a bunch of different things to sort of like round the picture out for myself. And so
Hmm.
you know
Yeah.
uh so again, I think I really applaud a lot of what they did. And for me, it was actually like just a great experience because that's coming through, very traditional academic medicine, evidence based, like everything, what's the trial, right, that showed that this is the right thing to do. Like, Restore's not playing in that world, right? They're playing in the world of like, you know, we don't have evidence for some of these things, right? Like people feel better, right? But that's valid in my mind. Like that's still valid and important to know. And so I think it really just like exposed me to a ton of everything else that's out there, and it's sort of like off the beaten path. The sort of like very strict and true evidence based medicine, but still has important application in people's health journey.
Mm. Okay, now I have two last questions. One is like a little bit more
Yeah,
granular, and then the last one, well, it's just going to be more broad. One of the supplements that has it kind of actually it's kind of along the same lines of what you were talking about with where it's always been there and then it's like people know about it. I don't know. It seems like it's getting a lot more popular now. It's just the talk around creatine, right? Like,
yeah,
should everybody be taking creatine? It also helps like with mental benefit, like it's like mental health too. So like, I was
yeah,
wondering
maybe,
just
yeah.
to get your, I guess, take on it. Then this is also just me personally asking about it too.
Yeah, so I mean, like start with the physiology of it, right?
Right.
Creatine is a phosphate donor, right? And so creatine, one of our energy, our we have different energy systems in the bottom, right? In the body, right? We have creatine phosphate, which is sort of like our immediate access to energy, right? Fast, it's like 10 seconds. It's when you sprint or something like that. We have the glycolytic metabolism, which uses lactate for energy production. Then we have, um, you know, aerobic metabolism, right, which uses oxygen to generate ATP. And so the whole idea with creatine is like, creatine levels decline over time, it with age, right? And maybe people aren't eating enough. They don't eat, the big sources are red meat and things like that. So people sometimes not eating a lot of those things. And so is it useful to supplement with creatine? So we have, you know, better energy production, right? Better. And so I think creatine has been one of the most studied supplements out there, right? Which I think is like nice because a lot of supplements like just have not been put through a lot of studies. Like creatine is probably the most well studied supplement.
Okay.
And the first question I always ask is like, is it safe? And it seems to be very safe. Like there are really like no contraindications to taking creatine. And does it improve athletic performance and recovery? Yeah, I think there's a lot of good data that shows that, right? Um, I think there's emerging evidence around sort of the cognitive benefits potentially of creatine as well. So and it's also super cheap, right? It's been around for a long time.
Right.
There's not like some like proprietary creatine, right? It's like creatine monohydrate, super cheap. And so in my mind, it's like, well, why not? But I would also say, like, again, like if you're going to just take creatine, like, and not exercise, like that's not the way, right?
Okay.
You need to you need to do the major things, right? And so again, they're called supplements for a reason. Like they supplement the major rocks of health. And so, do I take creatine? Yes, but I also, I'm pretty dialed in about the other things as well.
Yeah. Wow. But after this conversation, what I respect and also what I've learned is like having the foundation is like really important when it comes to just like your physical well-being, mental well-being, and even just like as I hear you talk, like even just centered around like the intention of saying like you're not axing other therapies out there because of X, Y, and Z, like specifically, but it's more of like, okay, well, the intention that you're starting out to like look for these is just as important, and you're really taking this like holistic approach to it. So like, I appreciate that sentiment, and thank you. I was
Yeah. Yeah. No, my pleasure. I think it's that's the hard part, right? It's like it is, people get frustrated because everybody wants like the clear answer to everything. And I think, most people, they're thoughtful and they think, they do a lot of this stuff. They work with individual clients. Like the answer is usually it depends.
Yeah.
Which is not what people want to hear, but it does usually depend.
Yeah. Like my whole BCP 157 question on if I should take
Yeah.
that diet. Well, anyways,
it depends.
Yeah, it depends. Well, Dr. Rich, Joseph, Dr. J, we really appreciate you for hopping onto the show. If somebody wants to reach out, learn more about you, VIM Medicine, Vital Connections, we're going to have, I was going to ask you what the best way to reach you, but I'm assuming it's the website, or unless you have an email that you want to shout out to.
Yeah, well, if I told you, I'm not on the socials. I'm trying to steer clear of the socials. If I can get on the podcast socials, that's cool. If other people put me on their social media, that's fine. But I just I can't.
That's fair.
I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Right. And so like I've had people direct message me, which is great, and I do check that. And then my practice, it's vimmedicine.com, VIM-medicine.com. And so there's a way to reach out through the website. And then Vital Connections is spelled Vital, VITAL, and this Connections is abbreviated CXNS.org. And feel free to link to both of those and sort of the wrap up with the show. But I welcome sort of people reaching out for any different of my identities, and happy to entertain and figure out, how I can best help people. And, I wish I could help everybody, right? Like, I think, this is a really interesting time in healthcare and health and human health. And I just want more and more people to feel more empowered and have more agency. And so however I can help do that, that's what I'm here for.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Dr. J. We really appreciate you for hopping onto the show. I learned quite a bit, and I appreciate you asking me some of the, let's say, well, I don't know if they were challenging questions, but I know some of them weren't. Well, yeah, they were kind of dumb questions too. But anyways, right? I appreciate it.
They were all good.
Yes.
They were all good.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. My pleasure. We'll see y'all next time. We have to have you back for another show.
For sure. Let's do it.
Thanks for joining us on the Precision Medicine Made Simple podcast. If this episode inspired you to learn more about your health, please leave us a review and share the podcast with a friend. Your feedback helps spread the word about the power of precision medicine. Remember, taking action today can lead to a healthier tomorrow. See you next time.